We've got springs. Spring is wire coiled up. It's pretty simple in that realm. I can't wait to see counterbalance really innovated. This has come a long ways since the old days, bag of rocks, which I thought was actually pretty good. It just took up a lot of space. Then we went to extension springs, and now we've got the torsion spring. I'm going to talk about the torsion spring. It is a pretty common one, even though a lot of you guys still see extension springs. The torsion spring has some added benefits because it's on a tube, so when it breaks, it doesn't fling to the back of the garage. The torsion tube is all about these coils of metal that just get heated and twisted, and they get twisted into different ID, internal diameter. And so this is one of the measurements we need to know when we're measuring our springs. And we have to get it pretty accurate. There's a lot of different IDs. You can see that those two are different. We've got some big ones, and they can get just really big. And so there's a couple of ways. Obviously, if it's broken, get your tape measure in there. And a lot of times what I'll end up doing is I'll burn an inch so that I can actually see what it's going to be. If I'm trying to put the tape in there, I could get it a little bit off. I could generally get it close enough. But in this scenario, this is one of Rayner's B springs, which is actually a 2 3/16 ID. There's 2 1/4 IDs, so it's very close, and it could get confused. If I get that discrepancy off and I'm going to convert, I'm going to get pretty close. I mean, really a 1/16 may not make that much of a difference in the ID. The ID allows us to put more wire into a shorter space. So if I have this 5.5 inch ID, you know, this has a lot of wire on it. The equivalent of this one in a 2 3/16 ID, this would have to be long just to have the same amount of metal. And that's what we're talking about. Springs break, if you don't already know, because of the twisting, relaxing motion. We get hairline fractures on the outside that we cannot see. If we had an electron microscope, we could see, but this is why we can never predict when a spring's going to break, because there's these little hairline, just stress points on these things, and eventually one pops, and that releases all the tension and the potential energy in these things when they're strung. Let's talk about, obviously, I think length is pretty simple, self-explanatory. We need 3 measurements from springs in order to convert or to have any kind of awareness of what IPPT is. And so we need the length, and that is simply end of coil to end of coil. So this one's 30.5 inch. We need the internal diameter. I said there's a couple of ways. I've done it where I can hold this measurement outside and get pretty dang close to the ID. I have to take into account the thickness of the wire. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So if we have a spring gauge, obviously this is a great tool, and it makes it pretty easy and quick to get to the right spring wire. And it's just a little bit trial and error. Maybe we've seen enough springs, we know exactly where we're going to go. Maybe we haven't, and we're just going to mess around with these gauges until we find the right gauge, and then we're off and running. Sometimes, you know, if we're not prepped with this in our bag, and maybe we left it at home, maybe it's in the truck, maybe it's just too far of a walk, we can take a tape measure and we can measure the coils. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure 10 coils and take that measurement and divide it by 10. So there's some math involved. But we also have the tools of our calculator. So this is a 343. I'm going to try the 331. What I'm going in here, if I can get you a close-up, I think a lot of you know this, but why not? I'm just going to make sure that the teeth sit in here and it's a nice tight fit. There is no gap in there. So this is a 331 wire. And just to verify that, if I don't have that spring gauge, I might even utilize a spring gauge with a tape measure and just measure first. But I'm going to count 10 coils. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I'm gaining a measurement of 3 inches and I'm just over 1/4. If I get really tight in there, stress my eyeballs, it's like a 1/16, maybe a 32nd. Those lines get pretty tight in there. So I'm going to do some math. If I take 3 divided by 16, or what would be the equivalent? 5 divided by 32nd? That's going to come out, and I'm going to pull up my Service Spring app or Rainer app, whatever you like to use, and I'm going to find the wire that's closest to that. Usually that'll zone me in on the exact wire that I need. Again, if we have a spring gauge, this is the ultimate tool, because now I can take that measurement and I can hone in on 331 and I can just verify and be like, indeed, it's 331. Great. All of our springs are different wire gauges, different internal diameters, and different lengths. And we need to know that information if we're going to replace that spring with something that is the same or even convert it different for a longer life cycle. I'll get into IPPT next and we'll keep it moving.